And I think we'll begin the questioning, if it's okay with committee members here. Would you like to go first, Bill? Is that okay? Maybe Bill, Tim, Lee, myself? If that's not okay, we can go in different order. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. This is kind of weird, I think.
Okay.
The first two chapters, you do a lot of stuff on Spinoza's metaphysics, okay? And it's kind of interesting. You're just talking about field metaphysics. I was thinking field and stream.
Oh, sure.
You're terminal. Okay.
But, and all the stuff on the individuals, and it's interesting. Sort of a dissertation Dan would like, I think. And all of a sudden,
Yes.
it's political stuff. What's going on? I was like,
Okay.
it was like two different dissertations that had one line connecting it.
Well, I can see that.
So if you could explain that.
Sure. I can definitely see why that, I can definitely see that in there, right? It is very metaphysical, and it branches into ethical and political.
And I didn't see the connection between the two very much.
Sure. Well, I'll see if I can.
That's kind of my point.
Okay, I'll see if I can make the connection. And the main reason I did that is, Spinoza himself ends up writing in this manner. He starts with very metaphysical stuff and he transitions to. So I was trying to do something similar to what Spinoza did, where you start with some metaphysics and you draw certain conclusions from it. But the connection I see is, my mentor at San Diego State, Steve Barboni, often said you can't do ethics without doing metaphysics. And I suspect he would agree that you can't do politics without metaphysics either. And what I had in mind was, I think Spinoza offers a certain metaphysical view of the world and therefore the individuals in it that leads to very interesting ethical and political implications. Not necessarily correct ethical and political implications, but interesting political and ethical implications. And I think that what I wanted to do was I wanted to see what those implications were. But if you're doing Spinoza especially, and I think if you're doing ethics and politics in general, I kind of hold this position, you have to get the metaphysical groundwork laid out first. And so what I really had in mind for me was, what's the moral and political payoff of what Spinoza is doing. But in order to get there, his whole system is so interconnected. You had to lay out.
That's what I didn't get. That was my point.
And okay, well, I think my connection is the notion of individual. Once I get to the notion of individual, then I can say, okay, well now what can we say about these individuals in the realms of morals and politics? So I think that first the system, then the individuals, and then these sort of implications about the individuals. I guess that's what I was aiming for. But perhaps I'm not coming across as well as I hoped.
Okay. Let's play that out a little bit.
Sure.
What does Spinoza mean by a state as an individual?
Okay. Is that the? You want me to answer now? Or you do?
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you were going to say more. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Well, the state as an individual. Okay. Well, let's go back a step. Metaphysically, in chapter 2, I spent some time saying that an individual is a being that has a certain unity, such that it has a conatus or striving, however you want to understand that. We should stay away from the idea of a conscious striving necessarily, but a certain tendency to preserve itself as that unity against external pressures. And this is sort of what makes something an individual in Spinoza. And Alexander Macheron, the French liberal, argues this. And, Macheron seems to say this allows the notion of an individual to be a little bit fuzzier than we're used to. So it's not just, that guy over there, that cat is an individual cat. It can apply to other things. And indeed, it must, because Spinoza applies it to the universe as a whole. And he says there are things in between here. So one of the things we can wonder about in chapter 3, and I do wonder about, is above human beings, what's the next individual up? Well, if it's going to be an individual, as opposed to, let's say, just an aggregate. An aggregate would be, in my mind, something like a pile of stones, where there's no intrinsic principle to the unity. It's just some external agent piled it up. There's nothing keeping it. It's not going to preserve itself.
Yes, that's on you. I can see that.
Mhm.
And biologists talk about things, going from individuals to families.
Sure.
That makes sense, okay?
Yeah.
But a state is different because
Yes.
we create it seems to me.
Right. That's what I think, yeah.
I'm not sure how
Oh.
the connection.
Well, I agree with you about the nature of the state. I think Spinoza does too, that it isn't an individual. But Maturon thinks he does think it's an individual. And I'm assuming that Maturon thinks that the state has some sort of conatus, it has an internal principle to preserve itself. The only way I can understand that is Maturon says various things like the state makes treatises, it punishes wrongdoers, it wars other lands, it controls the nature of the people within it. Because there's a little bit, if I'm an individual to some degree, my nature as a whole controls the
I
parts.
think that's true, and also that would be true of corporations.
I would think,
big
yeah.
issue in business ethics.
Are corporations people or something?
Of course.
Right.
But my point is that those things are done by human beings.
Yeah. I think that's Spinoza's point too. That's what I think Spinoza agrees with you.
Oh, okay.
In other words, yeah, I think that Maturon has got it wrong for that very reason.
Okay.
So that a state is something human beings do rather than, that's why the sports team too, right?
Mhm.
That's just a bunch of players playing. You can kind of speak of it loosely as a thing or an individual thing. But I don't think that you can really give it the sort of metaphysical effect. For exactly that reason, human beings created somehow artificial in a certain sense. And I think Spinoza, he sometimes speaks of the state as an individual. But I think, Barboni spends a great deal of time examining the Latin in these passages. And he does a great job saying this is all subjunctive, this is all qualified, it's a metaphorical style of speech. So, yeah, I think Spinoza agrees with that exactly, that these aren't really individuals. Although, we can kind of talk about corporation states.
And what does okay, let's say you're right.
Okay.
What does Spinoza do with that?
Oh, okay, what does he do with that?
Yeah.
That a state isn't an individual. Well, one of the advantages, I think, that comes from holding that the state isn't an individual is that...
does this impact on his metaphysics, his ethics, his political philosophy?
Well, yeah, I think primarily his political philosophy is the most interesting impact for me because in a very powerful sense, the individuals in a state have a certain importance that the state itself does not. And so individuals are more important. There's a line, I didn't end up using it in the dissertation because it would take a little work to make it apply, but I'll try it here. Spinoza, in discussing the Jewish state in his theological political treatise, says nature doesn't make races or peoples. I forget the exact Latin. It's in there. It was in there originally, but I erased the quote. So nature makes individuals. And there's really a sort of accent on the importance of the individual, the well-being of the individual. And I think in the end it allows us to take Spinoza to a point where Spinoza says, the state really is not what matters. Individuals inside it are what matters. The state is a tool for the well-being of individuals. And when it abuses that, it's no longer not only is it no longer a just state, I think Spinoza would say it's no longer a state, or a state of nature now. So for me, that's the path. I don't know if that makes sense.
Do I have any more time or not?
You do, you have a couple more minutes.
Okay, I'm just curious about this because I don't know anything about this. When you talked about Armstrong and Raven,
Yeah.
and you said that they're feminists.
Yeah.
How? There's nothing there about that.
That's true.
Can you explain what's going on?
Yeah, they both just sort of proclaim that they're reading Spinoza from a feminist lens. And what I think is feminist about it is, there seems to me to be a great deal in feminist literature about rejecting sort of classic liberal conceptions of the self as, atomistic, it's a term that they use quite a bit, so self-focused, self-contained, only secondarily relational, secondarily embedded in a community. And so I think that their meeting point with Spinoza and feminism is they see Spinoza as offering what they call this relational, embedded conception of the self. And so they're saying that Spinoza can help the feminist in the sense that...
Do they expand on that? I mean, that's a...
Not in the articles that I mentioned so much. Raven has a whole article on Spinoza and feminism.
Oh, okay.
And she argues that there's two big components for Spinoza. One is this relational conception of the self, but the other is his naturalism. Mm-hmm. Right? There's no transcendent realm of minds or gods or supernatural entities. And so everything here is to be affirmed in nature or something like that. I don't know that Spinoza would Spinoza is a naturalist. I don't know that Spinoza would necessarily agree that his naturalism has these consequences. But I think that that's one area they see it. In fact, there's a little reader, feminist interpretations of Spinoza. There's a great deal about his naturalism. That, and in terms of sexuality too, right? His naturalism, his rejection of teleology, sort of everything is here and now. And this is somehow seen as congenial to feminism.
Yeah.
Well, it's seen as congenial to
I think Professor Starr's point is that relationalism and naturalism doesn't make
It doesn't have to be feminism.
contact with feminism.
Right. That's true. That's true. I think they see it as congenial to that project. I mean, Spinoza's not a feminist. Right? There's a passage where he says that women can't hold political authority, and that's it. But I think they see this. I think that there's a connection in some of the feminist writings between these atomistic conceptions of the self, these male patriarchy males. The males somehow identified with the transcendent.
Feminism knows many strands.
Yes.
Completely.
Now I see what you're saying. Why? How is this
In
about
many ways.
Yeah. Many ways.
And finally, if I can
Sure,
one
sure.
more, what is a mystical reading of Spinoza?
Yeah, good question. I wondered about that myself, actually. It's something that Raven says about a mystical, and it has something to do with a view she finds in Stuart, Hampshire, where the individual somehow bursts the boundaries of their individuality, recognizes their oneness with the substance, and has this sort of intuitive joy or something. I guess it's, and that's thought of as being similar to my identity falls away.
Hampshire says that?
Well, at least Raven reads.
He's sort of a sane philosopher. I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, I know. I don't know that he actually says that. Raven reads him as saying something that leads to that. I can't recall. I remember him saying something about the individual bursting, but I don't remember exactly what he says. So he may not take that actual view. But that's how Raven understood that kind of reading of what's going on.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much.